I'm Ananda Lee Tan. I'm with the Just Transition Alliance, which is an alliance of frontline communities and workers that's been around for about 28 years now, working on solutions away from various ecological crises towards economic alternatives that could really are led by, but also for the benefit of frontline communities and workers. I go by he, him, theirs, and I'm currently calling in from the lands of the Tsleil-Waututh, the Squamish, and the Musqueam here in the Pacific Northwest. And I'll pass it over to my colleague Basav, whom I see next on my screen.
Yes, I am Basav Sen, and I use he, him pronouns. I'm with the Institute for Policy Studies, which is a small multi-issue progressive think tank. And my work at IPS focuses on climate justice. And I am on Piscataway land outside Washington, D.C. And I will pass it to Tyler.
Thank you, Basav. My name is Tyler Norman, he, him. I'm the director of a small NGO called Community Rights US. We work on helping communities to develop local laws to protect land and water and health. It's closely related to the rights of nature movement, if you've heard of that. I also volunteer for a group called Mutual Aid Disaster Relief. It's exactly what it sounds like. And so climate change is a big part of our work as well. Pass, Laura, thanks.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us from all over. My name is Laura Steichen. I use she, her pronouns, and I work with Basav at the Institute for Policy Studies. We are a small think tank, but there's still two of us, at least two of us, probably more on this session today. So good to see everyone. I'm also on Piscataway land, currently known as Washington, D.C. My work at the Institute for Policy Studies focuses primarily on the intersections of climate change and militarism. Back to you, Ananda.
Thanks, Laura. And before we continued, did we have any additional housekeeping things to share with folks?
Sure, yeah, just a couple. I'll share them now before we dive in any further. In addition to our language interpretation and our closed captioning, I also want to invite any folks who are joining us on the phone. I'm not sure if anyone is, but if you are joining us on the phone and you need to come off mute later in the presentation or in the workshop when we're doing interactive elements, you can raise your hand by pressing *9 on your phone, and then we'll be able to, I believe, take you off of mute. I also want to share that we are recording this session, and so if you're not comfortable being a part of being recorded, I want to invite you to feel free to turn your video off and change your name if you'd like to remain anonymous, because this session will be recorded and potentially posted in the future.
Thanks, Laura. And great to see. Thanks, everyone who's been able to post introduce themselves on the chat. And for folks just joining, we've invited folks to introduce yourselves, your name, gender pronouns, where you're from, if you're with an organization, what organization you're with, and however else you choose to introduce yourself or identify, please, you can post it in the chat. The first thing we thought we'd do is actually dive into a bit of an interactive session to learn from you what you perceive and what you know about false solutions. And I'm going to put a link.
Just a moment, Ananda.
Oh, yeah?
Laura, can you share your screen? And can you give me just a minute to, I know we're behind schedule, but can you give me just a minute to introduce the booklet?
Okay, yes. Sorry, I skipped over that, Tyler. Go for it.
It's all right. Yeah, Laura, can you share your screen? That'd be great. I'm going to talk just briefly about a document that we're really excited to share. Hoodwinked in the Hothouse is a booklet that we just published, the digital version on April 12th. You can download it at this website, climatefalsesolutions.org. We're excited to share print copies with you next month, and we're getting it translated into at least 3 other languages. This is the first of many webinars, and we hope to produce a lot of additional educational materials. Laura, if you could go to the next one. I'm just going to speak briefly about where this came out of, because the previous edition of Hoodwinked in the Hot House was published right before the 2009 Powershift event, and it made a big splash there, and it also made a really big influence at the Copenhagen COP in 2009. It was really influential, and a lot of people remember it fondly. And so the time has come again for Hoodwinked in the Hot House, and the new edition is, the subtitle is Resist False Solutions to Climate Change, because that's imperative right now. This we got our start in 2018 2019 at a gathering in a forest convergence in Southern Illinois. And I just want to mention that because gatherings like Powershift, like this forest convergence, these are really important events. A lot of new movements and new ideas grow out of them. So we're really happy that you all are here with us. And we're happy to share this new book. I'm going to cut it short there because our time is so short, and pass it on. But we'll be happy to answer questions about the booklet later, maybe.
So thanks, Tyler. Appreciate that, and you'll hear more about this publication throughout the presentation. But at this point, we'll bounce over to a Jamboard, and I'm going to put a link in the chat. And is that how we do it, Laura? I think if people can click on that link, it'll take you to a Jamboard that we're going to ask you a question about. So if you can click on that link, you'll go to a Jamboard. And for folks joining this call, this is an interactive session. There's a link in the chat that you can click on, and they'll take you to a Jamboard, which I see people joining right now. So you'll see a blank screen, and on one side of the screen is the phrase net zero emissions, and on the other side of the screen is a phrase is climate justice strategy. What we would like you to do is, if you see, for those of you who haven't used Jamboards before, you'll see an icon. Oh, that's great. Thanks, Laura. You'll see an icon that has a post stick. And if you select one of those post sticks and click on it, I'll do one right now, or you'll see a sticky note will appear on which I'd put your name and however you choose to identify, whether it's gender pronouns or the community you're from or the org you're with. So name and a simple identification, and then save that and then drag it to wherever on that screen. If you believe that net zero emissions is a climate solution, or if you believe that climate justice strategy is a climate solution, place your post stick closer to whichever phrase you find more compelling. And just for further context, what we will be talking about through this workshop is the complexity, because not all climate solutions are alike. And we see climate justice strategy as on one end of a spectrum and net zero emissions on another end. But take the time, thanks, as folks are putting up their post-its, take the time to think about it. If you have any questions in the meanwhile, I don't know if you can ask those questions in the chat. I think I'd encourage people to type in any questions if you need any further clarification. We'll give folks another few seconds to put up their post-it. And once again, if you're just joining the call, this is a Jamboard. We're asking people to put up your name on a post-it and put it close to whichever of these two climate solutions paths you feel more compelled to stand next to. And these exercises are typically called spectrograms, and they allow us to kind of also see that you don't have to be entirely in one camp or the other. You can be in the middle, but it's a good way to workshop different ideas and listen to different opinions. So one thing we typically do with this exercise, and I'd encourage folks to use it in other workshops, is try to see what kind of spectrum of opinion currently exists. And I see, for example, Grace with a smiley face is right below climate justice strategy. And so I'd take someone from one end of the spectrum and say, ask Grace if you're can unmute to share why you put yourself right underneath climate justice strategy. Is that something you'd be comfortable sharing? And it could just—
Yeah, sure. Oh, is it okay that I unmuted?
Please, no, we can hear you, Grace. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I'm still learning and self-educating on this, most definitely. But from my understanding, really like the net zero emissions narrative is really easy for governments and companies and institutions to kind of make empty promises in my eyes. And it's not, not worth fighting for. It's still worth striving for. But for me, it's a system that has a lot of opportunity for failure, and also is not necessarily holistic and I guess equitable. Whereas a climate justice solutions, like we were talking about, one, it has the term justice in there, which implies, orientation around frontline community members, and, at-risk populations, as well as a more holistic approach with hopefully a little bit less room for failure, and tolerance for complicity. So that's my thoughts there.
Thanks. Appreciate that, Grace. Now I'm going to go to the other end of the spectrum, and I'm not too sure, Carol, if you intended to put your post-it up there, but Carol, you're on. Okay. Why did you put your post-it where you put your post-it? I don't know if you're on mute or.
Yes, hi. I'm also learning. I'm an elder learning. And from what I'm seeing with environmental racism, that obviously is so prevalent globally and in the US, that the justice piece is critical, much more so than net zero. And as the previous speaker had stated, as far as I can tell, the little bit I know, that net zero is something that can be easily bypassed and passed off to harm POC communities. So that.
Thank you so much, Carol. That's great. And in fact, both of you, spoke a lot of truth, and I think our panel would generally agree with both of you. But to close that thought off, this was just a icebreaker exercise. Maybe I know we're running a bit behind, so maybe I'd invite my colleague Basav to say a few words about net zero emissions or this spectrogram itself before we move into the next workshop. Does that work, Basav?
Very briefly, just to save time, I'll point out that the word net zero emissions means almost nothing. It means whatever the person saying it intends to mean. It could mean I will emit 100 gigatons of emissions and somehow find a magic way to suck them out. Or worse still, I will keep emitting 100 gigatons of emissions, and I will tell you that, oh, by the year 2040, I will figure out some way to suck all of it away. So, so in effect, it means almost nothing.
Thanks, Basav. And again, I was going to actually toss this to one of my colleagues, but I'll say briefly on the climate justice strategy side, our panelists discussed this earlier, and I think we all agreed that one of the attributes of a climate justice solution would be solutions that are crafted by, led by, and governed by those communities who are historically most harmed and are first and most impacted by both the storms, floods, fires, and droughts of climate change, but also by the industries that are driving the climate crises. With that, I want to kind of actually go back to our presentation, and I think Basav will lead us off on the next little exercise.
I'll just tell you a little anecdote, actually, and pass it off to Laura to lead the exercise.
Okay.
So one fine September day in 2018, I was walking around San Francisco, and why I was in San Francisco is another interesting story that we will get to. But I saw this ad at a bus stop. It posed the question, making profits for your business or solving the climate crisis? And the ad answered the question for you. Yes. In other words, you can have both, right? And that thinking, in a way, encapsulates a lot of what drives false solutions. And you will hear more of what I was doing in San Francisco in September of 2018. So on to Laura.
Thanks, Basav. I'm going to share my screen again briefly so we can read the prompt for our next Jamboard activity. No. Okay, so we've been using this word false solutions. It's in the title of our workshop and we've mentioned it multiple times. And we want to just start to get into this. What makes a false solution? So we're going to go back to the Jamboard. We'll drop the link in the chat again. Toggle to the next couple boards, and we have 2 for each of these questions. So I know there's a lot of folks joining us. If we start to run out of space, there's 2 for each question. You can just toggle from one to the next. But we want everyone to help brainstorm what makes a climate solution a false solution. That's the first question. And the second question is, what are the motives of those who propose false solutions? So again, we're going to go back to the Jamboard.
I believe in the Jamboard, Laura, correct me if I'm wrong. These are pages 2, 3, 2 and 3.
Yeah, so the first question, we have two different boards for the first question. So that's 2 and 3, just in case 2 gets filled up. And then 4 and 5 get at this question of motive. So we'll take several minutes to fill those out. Feel free to put more than one sticky note, to start taking a look at others' ideas. We're answering the questions, on Jamboards 2, 3, 4, and 5. 2 different questions. So again, after you've helped brainstorm what makes a climate solution a false solution, then start thinking and sharing what are the motives of those who propose false solutions. I'm going to just we're going to start going through some of these. Feel free to keep adding to the Jamboard as folks share. Feel free to keep going. But and again, I don't think we mentioned this, but if you're having a hard time using the Jamboard, feel free to just use the chat and we can transfer it over. So no worries there. I'm gonna find one of these that sticks out to me, and then I'll invite my co-facilitators to do the same. Oh, I don't have your names attached to these, so it'll be harder to pick on folks. But I'm seeing under what makes a climate solution a false solution. I'm seeing a sticky note that says doesn't address the roots of the issue. I just want to invite whoever wrote that to share what they mean by that. Go ahead and come off of mute if you're comfortable.
Hi, Elijah, Shibe, Sarasota. I think kind of what I was touching on and what was elaborated on by a lot of the other sticky notes is when we trace back the roots of the issue, a lot of them are rooted in colonialism and systemic racism and oppression. And when we Band-Aid solution, electric cars or using less plastic or also putting the blame onto individuals, we're failing to recognize the systems that have brought us to this mess.
Ananda, is there one that sticks out at you that you want to call out?
Sure. I saw the one that jumped out at me was poisons communities. Would whoever put that up care to speak to that?
Yeah, I'm Kayla. I use she or they pronouns. I think that any solution that directly harms communities or harms the health of communities is not a real solution.
Excellent. Thanks, Kayla. I just wanted to add there because this was 10 years ago, or when we put out the second edition of Hoodwinked, was a big debate in the climate change advocacy community as to whether we should be strictly focusing on greenhouse gas emissions, noting that there are also toxic emissions that came out of the same smokestacks and tailpipes that poison communities on a daily basis, that people suffering from lung disease, asthma, cancer, a range of autoimmune disorders were being poisoned by the mercury and the dioxins and other toxic compounds coming out of the same smokestacks as carbon dioxide. So just counting greenhouse gas emissions isn't enough, but thanks. Tyler, is there one that jumped out at you?
Maybe on the motives question, just to move us along.
Yeah, sure. Well, okay. I mean, here's one. I think this is related to the motives question. I didn't get to that board yet, but I think it's worth pointing out this. It jumped right out to me right away. Someone said a false solution allows some communities to be sacrificed, right? And that is related to motives, in my opinion, right? Because which communities are getting sacrificed, right? I think that sort of explains itself.
Nice.
Let's just do one more. Do you want me to call it out, Basav, or do you have one that's drawing your attention?
Sure, yes. I see in the motives want to maintain power and want to maintain profit. They're pretty related. Would one of you who wrote that want to address that?
Hi, this is Esme, she, her, hers. Yeah, I actually wrote both of those because I do think they're related and they do go together. But I think, to me, the people who are often putting out these false solutions are the people who have the most at stake in terms of profit and the most at stake in terms of losing power, because in order for it to be a true solution, the power goes to the people, the power goes to the community. But these folks who have the power now are using their money to stifle those community actions. And they use the term carbon carbon trade or carbon caps to kind of justify their ability to keep polluting and not sacrifice their profit and not sacrifice their power in order to, again, sacrifice those communities that they see as dispensable.
Yeah, word. I think that's really well said. There's so much here that I want to talk more about, and we are going to have other opportunities throughout this workshop. So like really great to see some really strong contributions on the Jamboard already. I'm going to pass it off to Ananda, and I'll get the PowerPoint queued up for you to move us forward a bit.
Excellent, thanks. And really appreciate all the contributions, because actually this takes us into the next few slides. And these slides are directly from the Hoodwinked and the Hothouse publication we just released. And we thought we would present them in graphic form and really provide two kind of columns of what makes up false solutions, which we listed under market-based myopia or industry short-sightedness, you could say. And the other one, column being ecological consciousness. And those are generally attributes. But what we will do for the next couple of minutes is just focus on a couple of the false solutions and what are the attributes of the false solution. So if we could go to the next slide. So we have, for example, industrial scale corporate technofixes. Some solutions being proposed, whether it's at the UN or by the Biden Climate Action Plan or at various state policy tables, are really just too large for any community to really afford. And I usually ask, whenever I do community organizing, I ask communities, can you afford this solution? Is this waste incinerator or this waste to energy plant something that's affordable, or will you require a massive loan from a bank or from some, a subsidy from a larger government to actually build such a facility? And so that's just one attribute, but the others, do any of the other attributes speak to folks on this call? Does anyone want to look at the other two? Governed by elitist, patriarchal concentrations of power or reductionist analysis? Do either of those speak to anyone else on this webinar?
Yeah.
Hi.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, please go for it.
I was just going to point to the last one that says reductionist analysis, fixation on individual components. So that's the mindset that leads to your trying to solve one problem and creating another set of problems, because you see your diagnosis of that one problem is extremely narrow. You don't go all the way to the root cause. You just pick one symptom. And I'll give you one example. There are proposals to manage climate change by spraying reflecting aerosols in the upper atmosphere, like sulfur dioxide. And that, first of all, does not address the root causes of burning fossil fuels causing climate change. And it has other side effects. For instance, it disrupts the monsoon weather patterns that much of Africa and South Asia and Southeast Asia depend on for rainfall. But it shows the technocratic mindset that there are people who would even think of that as a solution because it reflects sunlight, and they're looking at it in that narrow way that, when there's climate change happening, sunlight overheats the earth. So.
Thanks, Basab. And I don't know, someone else was just about to voice a reflection. I'd invite you to go if it's still relevant.
No, thank you so much. Yeah, no, that was me. I'm Sanjana, she, her pronouns, and I'm calling in from Virginia on Kikoden land. So just wanted to share, in terms of reductionist analysis. So I'm an engineer, by training, and I work as a scientist, and I work in air quality. And one of the most disturbing things that I see kind of very prevalent in the space is this, unquestioningly mainstream narrative of very reductionist takes in technology and in science, which is disturbing for the reason that science and technology are the reason that we know that we're in this space. That's how we know that, carbon concentrations are increasing. That's how we can literally visualize how injustices perpetuate, and affect certain communities and everything. And there's this unwillingness to kind of ask the tough questions of how we, as scientists and engineers, are complicit in not only supporting, these unjust power structures, but literally building the infrastructure for them. So, I just like to kind of share, I guess, one for any, other scientists who are maybe starting to kind of question how they can look at any unintentional harm they've caused and start to actively try and be a part of moving towards solutions and listening to communities who have been affected and who have been doing this advocacy work. Just kind of like to put out a call to say that we really need to be taking a more active role in engaging with these community advocacy spaces, and really, really need to understand that we need to start incorporating justice and social frameworks into our work. Science doesn't exist in a vacuum. Science, although, it's fascinating as a concept to me that science has been politicized, and maybe it shouldn't be. Science is politicized, and it does have real world effects on people. And I think that, as we continue to sort of develop the fields of science, and as we continue to develop better monitoring technologies to understand how air quality is harming people, how heat pollution is harming people, how, pollutants in food and water sources are harming people, things like that, we really need to move forward to sort of centering that in our work and understanding that the complex systems that we deal with don't just exist in electronics. They exist everywhere all the time. And we really need to be a lot more cognizant about the world that we're putting the science and the tech that we do into.
Thank you, Sanjana. That was so eloquent. And I would hold that thought a bit longer. At the end, we'll come back to exactly what you put out there, Sanjana, ways in which we can all, step up and play a role in our fields of expertise, academia, etc. But to move on to the next slide, maybe I'll toss it over to you, Tyler. Are there any of these attributes that you'd like to speak to? What makes a false solution?
No, Ananda. I'm gonna pass because we're a little behind schedule. But I do encourage participants to look at these and share your views. We want this to be a participatory sort of thing. We're not super experts up here showering knowledge down on you.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. How about you, Laura?
Yeah, no, I'll just say the same. I would love to kick it to not to to do the same thing, but I'd love to just kick it to see if anyone from the audience or from our group, like, what sticks out to folks.
Sounds good. Anyone in the audience, any participants want to weigh in on any of these attributes of false solutions?
This is Corazon. I just wanted to say that I already I got a chance to quickly look through Hoodwinked recently, and I'm just, oh my God, I can't even say how grateful I am for the work you're doing. I wish there was so much more of this. But anyway, what I was going to say is regarding what you just shared, that to me, based on my research, this all applies to the majority of what environmentalist organizations are already promoting in terms of wind energy and solar, not just nuclear or other forms. So I think there needs to be a major intervention that happens. I just found, I'm posting it into the chat, an amazing study or article done in a journal about cultural genocide in wind turbines and the experience of a local community and all the environmental, social, cultural problems with what environmentalists are promoting as a salvation, a massive industrial infrastructure buildup that has never happened before to replace oil is only going to destroy more land, more human and non-human communities, and people of color are already around the world protesting these So thank you so much for this work.
Thanks, Corazon. And I saw Nadira had your hand up. So would you like to go next?
Hi, yes. Nadira. I work at Better Future Project as a disruption manager. I'm particularly focused on interrogating climate change spaces and how they are typically insulated white spaces, and seeing how seeing this 2 points about existing wealth concentration shielded from costs of adaptation and mitigation. The solutions are typically extracted from communities that don't have it to give, or who sometimes are aware of how they're affected but aren't supported in the supremacist infrastructure to protect themselves from the costs. And then the point about being defined by uniform monocultural and commodified systems and practices. I definitely see this within the organization that I'm employed. And like with just white executive directors who are saying that they're for climate change, but are interested in just fiscal sponsorships with Ivy League schools and students, like doing student work based on a model of deservingness and uniformity and supremacy and whiteness, rather than venerating the voices of the marginalized who are speaking very clearly, but whose voice is constantly obscured by the quote unquote listeners.
Thanks, Nadira. And for the sake of time, as you can see, there's, I mean, and it's, I really appreciate folks sharing, because it actually gives me a sense that we're dealing with a fairly mature and experienced climate advocacy crew here on this workshop, and really appreciate the contributions. But as you can see, we've kind of tried to categorize various attributes, and this plays out in so many different arenas. Most recently, or fairly recently, at one of the UN climate conferences, and I'm going to share my screen now. We actually had an encounter with the former Governor Jerry Brown of California. It was actually at the 2017 Bonn UN Climate Conference, where Governor Brown was confronted by some of our comrades, some of our climate justice, grassroots and Indigenous activists who are demanding that he stop the permitting of fracking projects and buying tar sands crude oil to process in California, and keep it in the ground. So I will, if you bear with me, I'm going to try to show my screen here and see if folks can see it. Okay. Oops, share sound, share.
Well, on Saturday, a group of protesters, many of whom were Native American, disrupted California Governor Jerry Brown's speech here in Bonn, calling on California to ban fracking. The protesters yelled, "Keep it in the ground."
Yeah, I wish we could have no pollution, but we have to have our automobiles. In the ground. In the ground. I agree with you, in the ground. Let's put you in the ground so we can get on with the show here. Anyway.
That's California Governor Jerry Brown Saturday saying, let's put you in the ground. Well, I questioned Governor Brown about his comments just before we went to broadcast today. On Saturday, a group of protesters, mainly Native American, disrupted your event and called for a ban on fracking.
No, they're calling for a ban on all oil production.
So they said
oil production.
So they said keep it in the ground, and you responded by saying, let's put you in the ground. Can you explain what you meant?
That was a joke. Now,
all right. So Governor Brown's joke triggered many of our comrades, and for right reasons, because in California, that had by then been in the 4th or 5th year of one of the largest carbon trading programs to be launched around the world. The carbon trading that was happening, the cap and trade program, was already putting black and brown bodies in the ground all across California because of environmental justice hotspots that were created out of such a carbon trading regime. So many of us organized a protest at Governor Brown's summit that he held the following year, where he invited the captains of industry. He called it the Global Climate Action Summit, and he invited his friends Michael Bloomberg, Anand Mahindra, and many other captains of industry who were positing themselves as climate change champions to come and share their solutions on what to do to bail us out of this crisis. And so we organized our rank and file members of the Takes Roots, Climate Justice Alliance, Grassroots Global Justice Alliance, Via Campesina, and many other grassroots movements got together, the Indigenous Environmental Network, and we drew a line in the sand, encouraging all participants at this conference to take a stand with communities and not with the corporations who were highlighting the solutions inside. I'll stop right there, but maybe if at this point, if anyone has any questions or reflections, or perhaps some of you were there that you might want to, I'll open it up for sharing.
I might make a quick note because I've been in the chat with someone I met at this summit and we haven't connected since then. Awesome. With Sanjana. And we went to this session that had like the leaders of WeWork and Lyft and Uber. And then we also went to the session of like Wells Fargo, which is one of the, by far the worst contributors to climate change ever. And so obviously, why would you take the companies that are doing the most polluting, the most injustice, and then you're giving them the space to talk about their climate solution? So I think it's very clear that these spaces are not meant for real solutions, right? They're just meant to like change propaganda about these companies.
Thanks, Kayla. Maybe I'll pass it over to Basav again, or is it, are you doing the next section, Basav?
Yeah, and in the interest of speed, I'm going to skip over some slides and ask people to go to the Jamboard where it says, what are some false climate solutions you know of? And, you know, start writing using the little post-it note.
So this would be on the 6th page of the Jamboard.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. 6 and 7, I believe. Yes. Yeah. See some good stuff already. Mm-hmm.
Can I just mention that the sophistication level of the audience at Powershift in 2021 is so vastly different than in 2009. I mean, I'm really impressed. You all really know your stuff already. And I'm really excited to see what all of you do with these resources that we're providing, because we need to push it out together. It's a movement moment, right?
Okay, and to move us along, there's some really good stuff here. But I'm going to ask one of the two people who wrote Cap and Trade to talk a little bit about why they put Cap and Trade on there.
I was one of the, Jess.
Hi, Allie. We work together. Do you want to go for it, Allie?
You can go for it. Yeah.
Cool. Jump in with whatever I don't hit. Yeah, cap and trade. It's first of all, it's a market-based solution, which in and of itself is a problem, but also doesn't actually truly reduce emissions, even in its goal to be an emissions reducing strategy, and really just allows basically fossil fuel industry corporations to compete within the market and not actually shift their practices or fundamentally change the structure of our energy system at all.
Great.
And I think
Laura, you want to pick something and ask about it?
Oh, did you say me, Basal? I will. Let's see. Man, there's so many good things here. I'm interested. Wow, it's hard to pick, but I'm interested in hearing from. There's at least one person that mentioned electric cars. I'm looking at one it's a green sticky note, but there may be others. Does that person want to share more? What do you think about electric cars, Ananda?
Oh boy, I think electric cars take away much needed resources from public transportation and ways in which we can really provide transportation to those most desperately needing to get to work and yet who cannot afford cars.
Yeah, another thing that's on the sticky note is the person wrote lithium mining, which I appreciate this. This makes a really good point. Like sometimes in global north countries and the global south, we come up with these climate solutions that are sort of exporting environmental problems for communities. In this case, in other countries, very often in the global south, and reinforcing these extractive economic systems. And these solutions that are perhaps solving the fossil fuel problem, but creating all sorts of other all other sort of environmental problems and whatnot. So that's another sort of hallmark of a false solution.
There's someone who wrote carbon capture and storage. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I think that was me. Unless somebody else put it also. But yeah, carbon capture and storage relies on, again, like not a shift in our energy system away from fossil fuels. It doesn't address the root of the issue. And it also like creates another form in which corporations can continue to profit off of this problem that they in fact are causing without ever being accountable for it. So that's like a very brief.
Love that. I think of carbon capture and storage as a magic junk food pill that's designed to allow people to keep eating junk food. It's something that the doctor will give you saying, hey, you can keep eating junk food. Just take this magic pill. It will make the effects of the junk food go away. In other words, does not address the root cause of the problem right there. So with that, I think we have a great list. Can we go to the slide that has the long list of the false solutions? Yes, and I put these in some buckets. So technology will save us, techno-fetishism, thinking that, a small elite group of engineers working in a lab will magically solve the problem. And that includes stuff like nuclear power and carbon capture. Shopping will save us, which puts it on individual consumers. So electric cars and recycling and stuff like that are going to save us. Again, not addressing the root cause of the problems, and reductionist thinking. For example, our current auto-dependent, highway-dependent transportation system creates sprawl, it destroys habitats, it destroys biodiversity, and replacing all internal combustion engine cars with electric cars will do literally nothing to solve those problems. It will continue this wasteful model of excessive consumerism. Then markets will save us, and that includes solutions like carbon markets, so-called nature-based solutions, which, and look at the greenwashing in the term nature-based to make you want to like them. And what that hides is the fact that it's often land grabs from farming communities, from indigenous communities, in the name of conservation and in the name of trying to offset emissions happening somewhere else. And then governments, the powers that be who allowed this crisis to continue, will save us. With what? And you might be surprised to see border walls in that list, for example. But I can assure you that the people who build border walls, the governments who push border walls, are quite conscious of the fact that climate change is driving streams of migrants globally who are trying to survive because their homelands are devastated by climate change. And the solution that these elites come up with is a wall to keep human beings out rather than to address the the needs of human beings for survival with dignity. So yeah, these are just some of the various false solutions that are out there. And with that, I think the next section is you, Laura, is it? Or no, I think it's Anando.
Oh, okay. And is this where we talk about real solutions? So we've actually reflected on some of the attributes and how you can classify some of the false solutions in buckets. That was really helpful, Basav. And I want to actually put in the chat again the link to the report. Oh, that's not it, but let's see. I will try to do that right now as I speak.
Are you talking about the booklet, Ananda?
Yeah.
I got it. I got you. You talk.
Okay,
I got
great,
you.
Great. So the last section in the booklet, we reflect on what are some of the attributes of real solutions for climate justice, like as opposed to a lot of the false solutions we've covered. And I thought that it was actually someone on our writing team who was an engineering professor, and I think Sanjana or one of the previous participants mentioned the responsibility that engineers, designers, scientists need to kind of bring into really looking at how we study solutions. And so it was really helpful to kind of really work with Sheila, who's an engineering professor, and really examine how do we actually even communicate, what are the attributes, what are the critical lenses we need to apply. And the first one we started off with is real solutions need to be guided by principled practice. And I usually say, we don't oftentimes need to recreate the wheel. There's many principles that movements before us have created, like the 17 environmental justice principles that were vetted via popular assembly at the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit in 1991. This is actually the 30th anniversary of that first POC Environmental Leadership Summit, oftentimes known as the first EJ Summit. I'd encourage folks to look up those 17 principles because they're still relevant today. And whether you're trying to navigate what are solutions to the pandemic, whether you're looking at environmental justice or climate or any other complex ecological problems, these principles provide critical guidance. But there's also principles like participatory action and research principles. When we actually try to localize or raise up the voices of people most impacted, there are participatory action research principles that can guide how do we actually research local challenges and local solutions and really seek out local knowledge keepers and and include their voices in participatory and centered ways that does not then create the stratas of class, gender, and race-based discrimination that oftentimes academia has created in the past. Tyler, are any of these guidelines speak to you? Would you like to address any of these guidelines?
I like the number 3, the holistic in tackling all intertwined ecological and social harm. I think that it really it reminds me of my upbringing doing ecosystem restoration work and things of that nature. And I think that when you approach things seeking to build relationship and connection and healing, it opens up a lot of possibilities that are not there when you're approaching things just trying to solve a problem, right? To just like fix something and replace some technology with another one. That's one of my favorites, at least.
How about you, Laura?
Yeah, I like that one a lot too, Tyler. I also really appreciate number 5, advance deep, direct, and participatory democracy rooted in local self-determination. I just like this one because I think it's really hard to come up with these sort of false solutions or have solutions that have a lot of the characteristics that we've talked about as ones we want to avoid or not pursue today. When you are truly creating spaces that are democratic, that are accessible, where there's true opportunities for participation. I think when those spaces are cultivated and those processes are cultivated, naturally there's going to be solutions that actually solve problems and meet people's needs.
Thanks. How about you, Basav?
So I'd like to point at number 4, replace economies of greed with economies serving ecological and human need. Capitalism created the climate crisis, okay? Capitalism, because of its, lack of constraint on use of resources, and because it views humans and ecosystems as sacrifice zones in its search for profit, created this crisis. And how can we now trust capitalists to solve this crisis? Obviously, they won't. And obviously, if we keep centering greed, if we keep driving our economy with the goal of enriching a small number of powerful people, how can we solve the crisis that that system created in the first place? So instead, we should restructure our economies in ways that addresses the needs of all communities and the non-human ecosystems in which we are embedded. And to do so would need re-envisioning our entire economic system.
Thanks, Basav. So the two we didn't really talk about or get into were how guided by Indigenous traditional knowledge, place-based experience, and public interest science. And the last one, which was centering the leadership and needs of those presently and most historically harmed. But I noted that a few people had brought that up before. I would invite, would anyone, and I see some comments that are brilliant comments. One of my favorite quotes, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Very relevant to understanding how we can't expect the markets or those destroying or causing all the pollution in the first place to be coming up with the solutions. But would anyone like to speak to either of those two attributes, centering the leadership of those presently and most historically harmed, or seeking the guidance of place-based and Indigenous ecological knowledge? or for that matter, Nadira, you put in mutual aid in the chat box. Could you elaborate? What is mutual aid?
Yes, mutual aid, I put that, it's such a popular topic right now, especially as we enter this collective state in the age of Aquarius, but very much about not working off of models of deservingness, but working from what we all have to contribute and how we can address the issues that are marginalizing us by empowering each other and giving each other the tools to take care of ourselves and to not be gaslit and told like, this is you, this is your problem, this, you did this, by not being proactive enough, by not being good at Darwinism, by not being white, by not being centered. It's your fault. It places power in the hands of the people and control. We get to control our resources and use them to service each other rather than service an institution or a model that obscures people.
Excellent. Thank you, Nadira. And you know what? This has been awesome. I wondered, Tyler, since you work for the mutual, well, you're also, one of your other hats is the Mutual Aid Disaster Relief Alliance. Do you have anything else to add to that excellent description of mutual aid?
I don't have all that much to add because that was just such an excellent thing about it. But it, you know, we talk about mutual aid as we talk about disaster response as natural human behavior. Like when trouble is at hand, people show up for their neighbors. And I think that really speaks a lot to that, that number 4, replace economies of greed, which are self-centered and self-serving and fueled by this consumer culture, and replace them with economies that are based in mutual aid and solidarity. Yeah, I think that those principles are really integral to these real solutions. Solidarity, not charity, is our motto. I noticed someone put that in the chat. I love that phrase. I love it. It's my favorite.
Thanks, Tyler, and thanks everyone. Thanks, Nadira. One closing thought, and we'll actually pivot to our last section of this workshop, but is that I've been looking at how in these times of pandemic, we actually are stepping up to meet some of the emergent constraints and conditions within which we need to organize. Because as we know, governments are prioritizing the needs of corporations, whereas we need to prioritize the needs of those most vulnerable, those being most harmed. And if anything, this pandemic has shown us, especially in the United States, is that Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities are disproportionately being impacted by COVID death and illness because of the existing industrial pollution loads, because of the environmental justice nature of this pandemic. That the communities that have the highest death rates are the same communities that have pre-existing lung conditions, asthma and respiratory illnesses, autoimmune disorders, diabetes. Those are the communities that are living next to or whose backyards are where waste incinerators, coal power plants, oil refineries, and other toxic petrochemical facilities have been cited, are the ones that are also being hit hardest in these times of pandemic. And so to me, that need to shift and look at what are the root causes gets really coupled with that. How do we actually see that reducing those industrial pollution burdens are a root cause remedy to the pandemic, alongside the vaccines, alongside the physical distancing protocols, alongside a lot of the other measures we're taking. We need to be demanding that those industrial pollution loads be directly addressed as a pandemic measure. Anyway, that thought said, I want to shift us to what we thought we would actually broach to you. And Basav, I know you were going to lead us in this conversation, so I'll pass it over to you. Or was it Laura? I'm sorry. One of you, I think, was going to lead us in this last one.
I'll kick us off and then I'll pass it to Basav while folks think. I don't think we have a jam board for this last question. I think we're just going to discuss as a group, and then it'll feed into a broader discussion portion for the rest of our session. It's a little cut off on my screen actually, but the question that we have, we want to like really now turn to some self-reflection, everyone in this workshop. What are false solutions that are being proposed or put forward I know there's a lot of students, so this could be at your school or just at an institution that you're a part of. Some folks spoke about their experience with different nonprofit organizations putting forward fall solutions, or even broader in your community. So just, yeah, welcoming reflection. What are some fall solutions that you're recognizing in the context of your own lives and communities? And then we'll also just sort of broaden that question, like what are ways that we can fight back? So want to invite folks to those questions, to both of those questions. And Basa, but you had a good example of a school pushing a fall solution. Do you want to kick us off and get people thinking?
Yes, very briefly. So I had mentioned this plan to put sulfur dioxide spray up in the stratosphere. There's one particular professor at Harvard named David Keith who is pushing that idea. So if you happen to either be a student at Harvard or live in the greater Boston area, I've just given you an idea of someone to protest.
Anyone wants to put in the chat or just come up and mute? Speak up.
Hi. I put a link in the chat to the Fill It Forward challenge. It was like a group of 3 schools through Hyundai, like had this challenge, like who could drink the most water out of like their bottled water. It was supposed to be like some environmentally friendly movement, but what actually, like in the first place, it's like not really doing anything. But then on top of that, really what happened is like you scanned a barcode on the water bottle and people were just scanning the barcode. Like they weren't drinking, they weren't even doing it. And then it just became this ridiculous like competition for nothing. Yeah.
Anyone else want to share any thoughts or examples of what could be done in your community or on your campus?
Miguel, go ahead.
Yeah, Miguel, yeah.
Hi, sorry I came in late, so I apologize if this has already been discussed, but something that we're facing in our local struggle here in the city of El Paso, Texas, which is an especially difficult and heartbreaking situation because we're like the 10th sunniest city in the world. And we only have our private electric grid only uses 5% renewable energy. So we're constantly being told that there are no solutions and that solar is too expensive and that it's not reliable. But now there's a big push to close down the gas plants and the natural gas plants. And this corporation is saying that instead of generating electricity from natural gas, they would generate it from hydrogen. And so I'm wondering if what you all know about that, and if you can direct me to some resources that we can use to debunk that sort of greenwashing. Thank you.
Can I talk about this? Just very,
please.
I don't know very much about hydrogen except that you know, I learned a bit about it through this book, Hoodwinked in the Hothouse. We have a small section about it, and I think the simplest way that you can refute that claim that hydrogen is a viable alternative is because the current technologies that exist for producing hydrogen are mostly using natural gas to make it. So, like, what, you know, what problem are we solving here, right?
Excellent. Any other thoughts?
Got some good ones in the chat. This one says, my school as an economics-based university likes to push market-based solutions in general. They never seem to question whether there even is a right for something as important as the future of the planet should be left in the inherent power dynamics of such an institution. Yeah, you're welcome to come up with mute if you'd like to elaborate on that. But that's such a good one, like these economic arguments that are doing sort of cost benefit analyses that are trying to put a price on certain communities and certain people's lives. Just really troubling way to sort of co-opt the academic institutions, try to.
Hi, may I interject?
Yes, please.
Sorry, I'm the one who wrote that
Yes,
message.
yes.
It's been truly a fascinating conversation for me as someone who lives in the South, in the global South, because whenever my university, which is, I would say it's a pretty, in economics terms, we would call it neoclassical university, talks about climate change or talks about the energetic future of the planet, they of course push a lot of market-based solutions. And even if you speak with professors who seem to have a better understanding of the inherent problems with any sort of energy conversation, you tend to either have, well, this like very neoclassical way of looking at things, or you have this very scientifically positive way of looking at things. And so with regards to the hydrogen question, a lot of people in my country, in Chile, like to think that the hydrogen energy will save us and that it will be the solution for all of our problems, when of course that doesn't change the inherent and very problematic power structures that make it so that, for instance, in my home country, the majority of the energy, which is mostly coal-based, is produced next to very poor communities. And so there's no sort of economic justice when it comes to asking how whatever wealth may be created by this new solution will be spent, and how we can actually make it so that we're not damaging other communities just by selling this idea so that maybe big cities as the one I live in will not have to suffer through higher pollution. So I think understanding the inherent economic factors that might be moving some of these fake solutions should be very interesting. And of course, we should question them whenever we have a chance. I'm sorry, I haven't practiced English in a while.
That was excellent. That was awesome. That being said, I know that I don't know if any of your campuses have these divest campaigns. There's currently a lot of campuses that are really looking at or student groups that are looking at their own institutions to see whether their colleges are invested in, their universities are invested in dirty fossil fuel and industries. And quite oftentimes we haven't necessarily outlined, well, what are the clean alternatives? But do you think any of those campaigns can be tailored towards targeting false solutions that are going under the radar? Yes, please. Anais, something on divestment.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Anais, I'm in Pittsburgh. I worked on a divestment campaign for 4 years. It was like the thing I did all of my undergrad. And I think like coming out of it, something that I've really learned is like, I don't even view divestment as a tactic anymore because it feels so much like a false solution with like, and I'm sure like some of y'all have worked on divestment campaigns, and I love the fossil fuel divestment movement and the radical people that come out of it. But I feel like we're so focused on just taking the money out of fossil fuels, and we don't think at all about what community reinvestment looks like or what it means to still have like these huge financial institutions and like academic institutions that at the end of the day, like still do not care about the impact of their investments. And it's such like, I just feel like people are not thinking truly about like reinvestment as like a powerful tactic to reinvest in communities and fix harm, as opposed to like, oh, we're just going to reinvest in renewables. Because I think so much of what comes out of the divestment movement is you can reinvest into something that's equally profitable for your institution, and not like you can reinvest into something that tries to repair the harm that your institution has caused to the community you're located in.
Thank you. That's excellent, Anais. Basav, I don't know if you want to say something about the Reinvest in Our Power campaign, which tries to address exactly that.
No, you go ahead and talk about it.
But in a nutshell, there's more you can find out online. I'll put the link in the chat. But the Climate Justice Alliance, early in its formation, started discussing exactly that point. Is like, what do we shift resources towards? Where there's massive public subsidies going towards all these false solutions, renewable energy credits, and all kinds of other production tax credits. How do we shift, if we are shifting investments, how do we shift them not only to decarbonize the economy, but also simultaneously detoxify, demilitarize, degentrify, decolonize, and democratize the economy? How do we shift the resources so that you can actually have community-owned solutions along with community governed solutions really taking root and being cultivated? And it's difficult without addressing the root sort of drivers of capitalism themselves. But what we decided to do is see how we could, in a small way, shift resources to actually and work alongside some of the student divestment campaign groups to look at shifting resources to actual cooperative, community-run projects. And there's a few up and running right now. In fact, there's actually even a financing mechanism. I'll try to put it here in the chat. Folks could learn about more of it later. Oh, I put something else, but Reinvested Our Power is the name of the campaign. And I believe there's even a new financing piece associated with that you could learn more about. So, but still, let's keep this conversation going. I know there's a lot of other points were raised. Would anyone else like to speak to what are things we can do to fight these false solutions? Nadira, yes, you've got your hand raised. How about you jump in there?
Well, I know from what I was mentioning earlier, I noticed so much of the internal life of organizations that are promoting divestment is ill and is ailing and very much centered in these destructive pillars of profit, of white supremacy, of in the nonprofit sector, especially being at the mercy of funders and not being purposeful and intentional with accepting who we choose to accept funding from. And personally at BFP, I've recognized a lot of resistance to decentralizing hierarchy. And we are working actively with students, encouraging them to do this work. But I'm constantly interrogating the space within where I can see that it's not an interest to do this work. And at some point, I start to question how much of this is really a spiritual choice to make sure that there is a marginalized party always, or seeking diversified employees just for profit to receive tax breaks and whatever, but not even absorb the wisdom that's being offered. And the false solutions that I hear in that space are like, oh yeah, sure, but not yet. Or yeah, you, but not right now. Or, well, what are we going to replace with power? Like once we dismantle it, what does that look like? And I've contributed some trainings and working on a general anti-oppression training within, just so we can start having a more rigorous conversation about the acceptance that we accept transgressions against others when we feel we can benefit, and there needs to be a true solidarity. But what happens when we just plainly see that a particular party isn't interested in solidarity as much as they pretend to be? Like, they're not false solutions at this point, they're false. It's just false. And that's kind of where I am with that. I'm working in the disillusionment of that.
Really appreciate that and that honest reflection. I've been lately, or for a while now, been pointing out the fact that diversity, equity, and inclusion programs oftentimes reinforce the status quo, and put a lot of young people in color in a lot of positions of problematic positions where they are invited into leadership roles in various organizations, and yet the cultures of the organizations haven't changed to really accommodate their needs. And so they're setups, but they're actually even dangerous because they give the facade of having changed, of organizations having made change when they actually haven't made the structural change. So I've been shifting and challenging some of the DEI training community to think in terms of what I call JEDI principles: justice, ecology, not equity, decolonization, and intersectionality guidelines, as opposed to equity, diversity, and inclusion. But it's, I appreciate you bringing that up, and that's a brilliant point. Any other thoughts or reflections on false solutions? I just wanted to point out that, like Basav mentioned earlier, almost every university, every campus, if you look closely enough, you'll find false solution funding, whether it's the fossil fuel industries or not, or their clean energy affiliates, or if they are some of the neoclassical economic or techno fix universities, or there's oftentimes even creative thinking put towards market-based mechanisms. How can you deepen the control or expand market share only with a green veneer? And one such institution, for folks, anyone who's living in New York, is Columbia's Earth Energy Center. It's a academic hub that I've fought for over a decade now. It used to be led by a man named Nicholas Themelis, but this earth engineering department at Columbia, it sounds great, was entirely funded by the waste incineration industry, and they put out a cadre of technocrats, grad scholars, postdoc scholars, who go out there and then promote, actually pimp, waste incinerator technologies all over the world, especially in poor countries in the global south. So I think we're kind of getting to the close, and I know our hosts had said we need to reserve a few seconds at the end for some closing comments, but I'd like to invite some of my panelists, Basav, Tyler, Laura, to share some closing thoughts. This has been really brilliant, and I really appreciate. I think Tyler's right. I mean, I'm realizing we need to re-engage with, the brilliant people who make up Powershift. It's been quite inspiring to hear folks' thoughts. Laura, Tyler, awesome.
Yeah, I'll just say very quickly, just big gratitude for everyone for being a part of this and for sharing. Like, really heartened by just the collective brilliance of this Zoom space. This is really energizing, despite the topic being, false solutions and like talking about a bunch of bullshit. People like really cut through that, and that's exciting. So thanks for being a part of this, and I hope to see folks at future Powershift sessions.
And I just want to add, it's been a real joy having this conversation with all of you, and thank you so much for being so engaged.
If I have one closing thought, it's that this was actually a really inspiring webinar for me. I was really impressed by all of you, and I'm actually tomorrow. I'm headed on my way up to the Line 3 pipeline blockade encampment, and I just want to mention that as a reminder to everyone that there's a lot of people fighting hard all over the world to stop these false solutions, and we got to have their backs.
Yeah, so thank you all so much for this session. I just have a really quick note from Powershift's end, where if you're not already on our Slack, you should definitely join so that you can be connected to the movements of these wonderful panelists, as well as to everyone else in the chat. And yeah, just updates from the convergence will be in the Slack, as well as some Earth Day actions. So if you're not in, just get in, and I'll drop my email as well if you need any support with that.